A lot of attention has been given to this photograph. It was taken at the end of the No Kings rally in Memphis, Tennessee on March 28, 2026. Lots of speculation has been floating around about what happened before, after, what might have provoked this incident, and I would like to take a moment to set the record straight. My name is Gary Blevins. I'm a resident of Memphis, Tennessee, an independent videographer and small business owner here in the city. I've not been compensated for the recording of this video or the post-production thereof. I'll be posting it in a variety of different places, all of which will not be monetized. My goal is to share the videos and stills that I captured over the course of the event with the hopes of creating as accurate a representation as possible of what occurred at that event. First, a little about the event. The No Kings event was scheduled for March 28, 2026 from 2 to 6 p.m. Most of the programming was scheduled to take place in the Robert R. Church Park in downtown Memphis, Tennessee. Here's a map for reference. If you're not familiar with downtown, this is the primary entertainment district. FedEx Forum is where the Grizzlies play. Beale Street is, of course, Beale Street, and there's lots of parking garages and so forth in the area. The crowd was expected to be in the thousands for the No Kings protest, and they were parked in those general areas. Most of the footage that you're going to see is going to have a timestamp in the upper left-hand corner. That's to show what time it actually was when the video was being recorded. I arrived a little bit before 3 o'clock, just in time for the Aztec Dancers Bless event, which was very cool. They were tremendous dancers and drummers. And we also had a crowd there of roughly 2,000 to 3,000. I'm terrible at estimating how many people are in a crowd, but best guess based on the footage is 2,000 to 3,000 people. After the Aztec Dancers wrapped up, the stage was reset for some speeches by local union leaders, community organizers, faith leaders, as well as some elected officials, including Congressman Steve Cohen, Memphis City Councilman J.B. Smiley, and Tennessee Representative Justin J. Pearson. Once the speeches wrapped up, the crowd did dissipate a little bit. We probably fell to around 2,000 people, but we started to get ready for the march. Again, the event started in Robert R. Church Park, and the march was going to go a few blocks around and come back to the park. It was going to go up to Beale, walk down Beale, make a left onto 2nd, walk another block, make a left onto MLK Avenue / Linden Avenue, as Google Maps has it listed here, and then walk back down that street to get to Robert Church Park. At 4:50, the march began to get organized on 4th Avenue, just south of Beale Street. Now, there's a number of things that I want to point out in this shot. The people that are in the orange vests, these are protest marshals. Now, these are trained volunteers, and their job is to marshal the protesters, right? So they keep the march in order. They make sure that people are staying behind the banner. They make sure that people are not blocking traffic. They're keeping an eye out for any other security concerns that might be out there. So these are essentially the crossing guards of sorts for protests. And this is a pretty typical thing, and you almost have to have them if you're going to have any kind of successful march. When you think of a march like this, think of a parade. And you wouldn't be able to do a parade without people making sure that everyone was safe and moving in the same direction. That's what these protest marshals are for. So we got headed west on Beale at 4:54. There's obviously a ton of people here, and the organization of this is going to be really, really important. So let's talk for a moment about the anatomy of a march. That big banner that says No Kings, that's not just decorative. That is the pace car of sorts for the march. So if there's anything that stops that banner from moving, everything behind it stops moving at the same time. This is for everybody's safety, to stop anybody from getting trampled. Now you can also see that the marshals are starting to do their job on the far left and the far right. Again, you'll notice that everyone's staying behind the line. The marshals are keeping everybody secure. But you'll also notice that the marshals are not looking so much at the protest as they're looking around for safety concerns. They're looking at rooftops. They're concerned about a potential active shooter. They're making sure that there aren't any special threats to the marchers. In front of them, you'll also see the media taking a lot of pictures and video, but it looks like my shot is a little bit higher. For clarity, I'm not using a drone. What I use is a monopod, which allows me to use a telescopic pole to get a much higher shot. I also had a gimbal to the top of that, which allows that to be a real stable shot. So it looks like a drone shot, but it's really just me holding a very long pole with a gimbal on top. So at about 4:57, we made it to our first milestone, which was the intersection of Rufus Thomas Boulevard and Beale Street. Now, these are both pedestrian-only streets, so there aren't any streets being blocked here. This is all pedestrian only. But it's important to note that marches do stop from time to time for a number of reasons. They stop to make sure that everyone is okay. right? We've got a lot of older folks in this crowd. We've got a lot of children in this crowd. We've got a lot of pets in this crowd. So they're making sure that all of those folks are okay as they're moving down the line. It also gives those marshals an opportunity to make sure that there aren't any stragglers pushing off to the side and kind of keeping everybody in the column that they're trying to move down the road. Here I jumped in the crowd to get a shot of everybody walking down. I wanted to point out that these are, like I said before, some older folks, some kids, and this is not a hostile crowd. The general feeling here is joyful and excited, and it's a beautiful day. After another brief stop in front of A.W. Schwab, the protest then made the turn on to 2nd Street from Beale. Now this road often has vehicular traffic, but it's almost as often closed. I didn't feel like this was unusual for this crowd to be out on this road. So there was a little bit of an obstruction, but the crowd made its way around. And you can see that the road is open, that there isn't any traffic on that road. There aren't any police to stop us. There's nothing going on here. Again, you can see we've got kids, we've got dogs. It's a beautiful day. Everybody's having a good time. Music's playing, chanting. It's all good. It wasn't until we got to the corner of South 2nd Street and MLK Avenue and went to make the left that we first started to encounter police. We hadn't seen any police up until this point, but we made this turn and we met a bunch of them. So there were a few that were already in the intersection, but as the last of the marchers made the turn, a phalanx of police officers showed up behind us. A bunch of cruisers roared up, sirens blaring, and it was very intimidating. You can see the marshals there with their hands up. They're not sure why the police are reacting in this way, but they are coming out of their cars and they're clearly have got something that they want us to be doing differently. So the time's now 5:18. The marchers are continuing now to move east. The officers here are clearly trying to get a hold of the marshals, trying to talk to whoever's leading this march. They do get a hold of one of the marshals and they start to ask different questions. I can play the audio for you here, but we can't hear what they're saying because there's chanting and noise, and someone is laying on a car horn, so there's no meaningful audio here that would be useful. What I gathered from their interaction is this officer wants the marshals to try to move everybody onto the sidewalk. Now, they're covering about 3/4 of this 4-lane road, so the odds that they're going to be able to get onto that sidewalk seem very, very low to me. I don't know how they would possibly comply. The other thing to notice as we're following them here are the number of police cars that are already in the street blocking the road. If their concern is that the marchers are blocking the road, they're already blocking the road. I'm not sure what their goal was with putting all of their cruisers in the middle of the street. So for clarity, this is where the march is. They're on what's marked as Linden Avenue in Google Maps, but it's really MLK Avenue. Like I said, they're taking up 3/4 of the 4-lane road and most of the block, and they're continuing to head east. And again, their final destination, Robert R. Park, about a block and a half away. If we go back to the shot with the officer, we can see that small shack in the background. That shack is a really nice marker for us on Google because if we jump to the satellite view, we can get a clearer view of where the protesters are and where they're trying to go. If we look at a street view of this, you can see again, this is a 4-lane road. And if there are so many people that it's taking up 3/4 of the road, how in the world are they possibly supposed to get to the sidewalk? That's just not a reasonable request. That's not a thing that these people could possibly do. And again, their destination is about a block and a half away. I went to a wider shot here so that you can get a better feel for how many people are actually in this march. Now you can see that the marchers are starting to fan out a little bit as they get to the intersection of South B.B. King Boulevard and MLK Avenue. This is why the marshals stop marches, so that they can avoid this kind of problem, so that they can get people back in line. And that's what happens here. The police officers are trying to catch up to the front of the parade, and they come to a stop so that the marshals can get everybody back in line. And I think because they're also seeing the police officers here and they're a little confused by their presence. Again, you can see we've still got kids in the crowd. Now I speed up the footage here a little bit just to get us to the interaction between the marshals and the police. The marshal here is trying to explain to the police where this march is headed and the fact that it's nearly over. At this point, City Council member J.B. Smiley joins the conversation and he starts to interact with the police. And you can see that they're having a dialogue back and forth. Again, unfortunately, the audio isn't usable here, but you can see that he's pointing at Robert R. Park. The police officer clearly understands that that's where they're headed. They seem to nod. He's like, He tells him, it looks like he's telling him to keep going. He says, okay. And then Councilman Smiley says, let's keep going. So again, I speed up the footage here to save you some time because we're walking down the street. We're coming up on the FedEx Forum. And again, they take a short pause here to regroup because now there's vehicular traffic on the north side of the road. And when you have this many people walking and cars moving, it's usually a bit of a problem. So the marshals are working hard to make sure that the protesters are keeping that lane clear so that vehicles can get by. To that end, they take another short pause at the intersection of Hernando and MLK Avenue. Again, they're centering the banner so that everybody knows where they're supposed to be. Traffic is moving by on the right-hand side, while the rest of the march heads down on the south side of the road. Again, there's music, there's chants, the media's there. J.B. Smiley has another conversation with the police. I'm not sure what this conversation is. Again, he's pointing out that they're just a few hundred feet away now from the end of this march. They continue on. Speed up the footage again. Again, in this march, there are some elderly folks and some folks with some disabilities, so it's not a fast-moving group. But they are now in front of the St. Patrick Catholic Church. Again, they're now about 100 feet away from Robert R. Church Park, where this march is supposed to end. We can see the park. Even now with the police presence, the atmosphere in the march, while slightly more tense than it was before, is still really festive. It's still celebratory. It's still, we've done a thing. We're almost to the end of this march, and it's been a beautiful day, and we're looking forward to wrapping this up. It really is a pretty festive atmosphere. Unfortunately, at this point, I'd been recording a lot longer than I had originally planned, and the battery in my cell phone died. I had to take it out of the gimbal, plug it into a battery. So now I'm handheld. I'm not using the gimbal anymore. But this is where the police get a lot more involved. As you can see, the marchers have made it to the final intersection. They are in the process of moving into Robert Church Park. A couple of things to note here. We can see in the distance that there are a bunch of those police cars that we saw originally at the intersection of MLK Avenue and 2nd Street have followed the protesters very closely. And at this point, they all have their sirens blaring and they're pushing, not physically pushing, but pushing with their presence, the protesters further down the street. It's also worth mentioning that the officer in the foreground is the officer featured in the picture that I showed you at the beginning of this video. So as you can see, the crowd is starting to disperse. The marshals and other members of the march are waving people to get out of the road, and they are complying. Councilman Smiley is there, again, waving people out of the road. The people in the red vests are paramedics, but what's behind them are all of those police cars that I mentioned a moment ago that have now alarmed the marshals. So they are concerned that the police officers are getting too close to the protesters and the marshals up there need help. So they are running to create a chain that will continue to move the protesters back. So they're forming a chain there and then walking backwards. You can see there that they've linked up, but they are walking away from the police officers, moving the protesters further down the road to eventually get them to Robert R. Park. But the police officers in our foreground don't seem to understand that that's their objective and start rushing towards them. We can see that the marshals have linked their arms but are walking backwards. They're moving the protesters off of the road in as safe a manner as possible. Now I slowed down to 50% here so that you can get a better understanding of what's happening because it gets pretty chaotic pretty fast. So this is 50% speed. So the police are now headed towards those marshals. Keep an eye on this gentleman here. You can see that he's got something in his hand. That is a canister of some kind. And I think we know from the picture that we saw what's going to be in that canister. He gives it a good shake. He's clearly intent in that moment on spraying these marshals. Now I'll take it back to full speed and let it play so that you can get an idea of the chaotic nature of what happens next.
Get back!
Obviously, that was chaotic and disturbing. Let's take a moment, roll it back, and take a closer look at what actually happened. So we're back at 5:31, 56 seconds. This is just as the police officers are rushing towards the marshals that are creating that separation between the police and the protesters. The first person to make contact isn't actually the guy with the pepper spray. It's this officer here. He jumps into the middle of that line and starts to create a scrum with a couple of the marshals. I'm not really sure what the point of that was, but here comes the pepper spray. Oh, and what's the story with this guy? He's got some kind of weapon in his hand. I think that is either for tear gas or for pepper balls. I'm not 100% sure. But this is the guy in the photograph that gets the face full of pepper spray. Let's keep an eye on him. So he's coming in. He's trying to get to, it looks like his friends. He's already bends down to pick something up, and he looks like he's trying to get through the scene. He ducks under the officer with the pepper spray, gets a little shoved, loses his hat. But then the officer sprays him, but didn't get him well enough, I guess, because he chases him down, spins him around, and this is where that photo was taken. This is the moment in that photograph. I don't have a good angle on it, but that is what's happening in that particular moment. He drops him and turns to go someplace else. One of the marshals grabs the guy that now has a face of pepper spray and leaves the scene. At this point, there's been so much of this chemical irritant sprayed into the air that it's just kind of hanging because there's no wind. There's no breeze moving any of it away from the scene. So it's all just kind of hanging around. A lot of people are starting to breathe it in, including several of the officers. You start to see them cough here in just a moment. But keep an eye on the woman in the middle ground there. She's holding the bag with the jeans and the sweatshirt. She's about to get a lung full of this chemical irritant. She clearly wasn't expecting it or what came next. This officer seems to tackle her for no apparent reason. She's not engaged with any of the other officers. She's clearly just walking across trying to get to another part of the scene. The officer has tackled her and is trying to move her to her stomach, I suppose, to handcuff her, but her leg gets pinned underneath her and she's clearly in a lot of pain. But while all that was going on, there's something that happens in the background here that we should also take a look at. So let's roll that back one more time. So while this marshal is getting handcuffed, there's a gentleman that comes up in the background here with the beard and the black t-shirt. He's clearly there just trying to calm everybody down, right? He's calm down, and other police officers are rushing in. He's clearly trying to keep everybody calm, and the officer with the pepper spray decides that's not okay with him, and he gives him a face full of pepper spray at point blank range. He obviously can't see. He's going to have trouble breathing. Another officer comes up and decides that he needs to be in handcuffs because he's got a face full of pepper spray. Another officer agrees with him, and they begin to move him into custody. He obviously is having a hard time doing anything. There's an obstruction here. He comes back into view, and they are trying to now move him over to the car, and he gets a face full of the hood of the Memphis Police Department's vehicle. Not really sure what he did wrong there, but he clearly is having a bad day. By the time we got to this point, most people had already left the intersection. But after seeing the police reaction and their decision to start tackling the marshals and other people that clearly hadn't done anything wrong, the crowd became enraged, and they came back into the intersection and started to chant and started to wave cell phones and their signs, and they were fired up again. There is no doubt about that. Some of the local political leaders that we've mentioned began to try to negotiate with the police officers, trying to get an explanation as to why they had reacted in the way that they did and to find a way to de-escalate the situation. That went on for several minutes before the cavalry arrived. I mean that literally. The Memphis police called their cavalry unit. They brought out a number of horses to, I guess, contain the crowd. They occupied the intersection. Thankfully, the horses didn't do anything. They didn't move once they arrived on the scene. A few minutes later, the police got away from the protesters. Again, Councilman Smiley talking to them, trying to figure out the best way to de-escalate this. Again, you can see here that the marshals are doing exactly what they're trained to do, which is to create that line between the police officers and the marchers so that they can move the protesters back. Right? So that's exactly what they're doing here. The marshals have made the line that apparently was the problem before. They've reformed that line and are starting to move the protesters out of the intersection. This went on for several minutes. You can see that the road is completely closed now, and the police have closed it at Danny Thomas and MLK. And for some reason, one of the officers went into the crowd by themselves, which seemed like a weird choice. So he went kind of running in, and then a bunch of officers followed after them. They appear to be after a single individual. I'm not sure why or what the particular story was, but now all of a sudden, here they come, and here's Councilman Smiley. We were just this close to being able to wrap this situation up, but now the police are back into the crowd. They're pursuing one of the protesters and trying to move them out. It appears at this point that they do get a hold of whoever it was they were chasing, and they start to make their way out of the crowd. Again, though, this has re-inflamed the crowd, so now there's a whole other round of chants and screaming and frustration. So they do take somebody into custody. I don't know what the details were that led to her being detained here. But at 5:59, the police do decide to start to vacate the scene. The cavalry units leave the area. They are not seen again over the course of the evening. And then one of the marshals that was detained is released. You can see here Councilman Smiley bringing her away from the police, back to her friends and family and into the crowd. There are a couple of other people that have been detained, and the crowd is wanting all of them released. Here we can see Justin J. Pearson, the Tennessee State Representative, coming to check on what was happening. This gentleman with the bandana and no shirt was one of the marshals that was sprayed. He's checking on his condition, making sure that he is okay. But as you can see, he's back on the line. And just as a second of the marshals that was detained is released, she drops something here, but Councilman Smiley picks it up for them and hands it back to them. They head into the crowd, and there are cheers all around. I thought this was interesting. The crowd has basically dispersed, but the police still have the road closed. So it seems strange to me that that was their primary concern, but then don't seem in that big of a hurry to reopen the road to traffic. I happen to know that on that evening, an NBA game was scheduled to start in just a couple of hours, so there was going to be a lot of traffic coming through this area. So it's a little surprising that there are still this many police officers' vehicles blocking traffic. You can see that there's a police vehicle blocking the westbound traffic on MLK at Hernando. So if they were really that concerned about the traffic being blocked, it seems strange that they wouldn't be in a hurry to reopen this road. This is the third No Kings protest that I've attended in Memphis, Tennessee, and this is the first time that I've seen really any interaction from the police with these protesters. My estimation of what happened was that the police understood where the protesters were going to be. They didn't interact with them while they were on bail. They didn't stop the march from beginning when they were going to leave Robert R. Church Park. They didn't stop them when they turned onto 2nd. They waited for them to turn left onto MLK Avenue where there was no place for them to go, and then boxed them in. They created a situation, they provoked it, and then they escalated it. They attacked a number of the marshals whose job it was to keep everybody safe in that situation, including the law enforcement officers who attacked them. It was a very disappointing moment. As someone who's lived in Memphis for a long time now, I lost a lot of faith in the Memphis Police Department on that day, and I hope that there's some accountability for the officers that were involved and the people who made the decisions that led to this unfortunate event. It's my understanding that all of the protesters and marshals that were detained on Saturday have been released. I don't know if any of them have been charged with any crimes. I also understand that a number of the officers that were involved have been put on administrative leave while an investigation takes place. I'm hopeful that there'll be some accountability for these officers and the people who made the decisions to provoke this regrettable incident. It turned what was a beautiful day of celebration, a day of peaceful protest, into a day of tears and a need for more accountability. I'm grateful to the volunteer protest marshals for putting themselves in harm's way to protect the elderly, the disabled, the children, all of whom deserve to be able to exercise their First Amendment rights without fear of reprisals from their local police department. Now, there were just as many reasons to be at the No Kings protest as there were people at the No Kings protest, but whether you agree with any of them on any of the issues or not, they do have the right to assemble, they do have the right to protest, and that's one of the things that they were there to protect. They deserve the right to be able to do that without fear of intimidation and without being assaulted by their local police department. Obviously, the video that you've seen has been edited for time and for content. If you want to see the raw video, it'll be available by scanning this QR code or linked in the description of this video, wherever you might find it. Again, I was not compensated in any way for the creation of this video. I make it with the hopes of presenting an accurate representation of what actually happened on that day. Please take it as such.